another exciting episode of the BlueWhite Tailgate podcast. Frank Banani, the York Daily Record. Andrew Callista is myself. Not proper English. I don't really care. It's a podcast. We are rolling. Mike Gross would have it at me for saying it like that. Mike Gross off today. A little bit of the sniffles and cold. So we say, Mike, take a little bit of a break. My dogs are going nuts in the background. We do have an exciting show. Dogs are obviously excited for it. We have John Ziegler, podcaster, documentary and filmmaker. Just had Bob Costas on his podcast, so it's going to be an exciting show. But we are going to start with some exciting stuff. Penn State wrestling, Frank. This is your cup of tea. This is your big week.
Yeah, going up tomorrow night. Friday night, BJC sold out. Expensive tickets, from what I understand, like football price tickets, because you're going number one versus number two. And I think it's not just the NCAA wrestling dual meet of the year, but I think you could argue, when was the last time there was a dual meet bigger in the regular season than this? Ohio State 17-0.
I think it was was it 18 when Ohio State was number one and Penn State tore them apart? It wasn't even close. Tickets were, I want to go back to when it was like Bo Nickel, Jason Knopf, and those guys on the roster. I meant to look that up for this week. Maybe I will as we're talking here. But there's a lot of great matchups tomorrow night. Like at 125, Luke Lillidahl versus Nick Bozakis. Am I pronouncing that right? Is it Bozakis?
I'm not really sure, and we're thinking that it'll start at 125. I would hope,
because it always. I mean, Kale is traditional, and Penn State Ohio State's always gone straight traditional 125 through. Marcus Blaze, number 4, number 2, Ben Davino. That might be the match of the night. 125 might be the match of the night. The one that I'm actually most intrigued about, though, is I want to see Braden Davis wrestle Jesse Mendez, a 2-time national champion, and I want to see where he stacks up.
Yeah, it'll be exciting because Braden Davis could go just full out crazy mode from the beginning, right? Like he did the last match, and he scored a couple takedowns in that one, and just say, what the heck? What do I got to lose here? Going against a 2-time defending national champ. But do I expect Braden Davis to come out of this on the right end of things? Jesse Mendez, I think, is arguably the top wrestler in the country. I mean, he's maybe right behind, and he's probably right behind Mitchell Messenbrink, and they like that pound for pound Flow Wrestling poll for top wrestler in the country. I mean, he's dominant no matter what weight class. So, yeah.
I mean, Ohio State's, they're not going to win this match. It's going to be a 20-point match. I don't want to burst anybody's bubble thinking they're going to see a barn burner. Nebraska kind of shocked a lot of people, down one at the break, intermission. 285, I think, is a really interesting match with Mirasola. I know he's, been beaten twice by guys Nick Feldman has beat. Nick Feldman's number 3 in the country on Intermat and by Flow. So that could, but he's getting better. I think every single time he takes the mat, he gets better.
Yeah, he does. I mean, you're probably right about the final score, and yet, there's some caution there. If things just break a little bit, not Penn State's way in those first couple matches, I could easily see Ohio State winning decisions on those. I'm not saying that means they're going to win the meet or anything, but I think you could end up with something like Nebraska, it being very close in the first half. But I'll say this. Right after halftime, 4 straight wrestlers, all number 1. And I'll say this in a story. Has there ever been a 4-man run like this at Penn State? Ever? 4 in a row. Those guys are like 62-0, all ranked number 1. Only, 2 of them haven't even allowed an opponent to finish a match against them this year. So they don't have the big names as some of the Penn State wrestlers in the past, right? Not the exciting personalities, but I don't know if there's ever been four in a row like that at Penn State.
Yeah, the personality-wise, there's definitely no flair there, but just straight business. I mean, if you're looking for flair for Levi Haynes, this is a guy who both of us covered in high school. I loved being around him at Biglersville. I loved being around his dad. I loved being around his family members who coach Gettysburg. wrestling, and it's just always a treat. Straight business, nicest kid. I remember having him up on the podium and seeing David Taylor tweet out about him as a freshman Levi Haynes. This kid's going to be a stud. Well, he is a stud. David Taylor called it right, but he's at 174. It's amazing how big he's gotten from what we covered him when he was in high school, Frank. And he's kind of set the tone because he did the thing that nobody does. He left high school early to go and train at Penn State. Didn't even wrestle his senior year of high school.
Yeah, I mean, he's already won a national title. And I think he seems to me to be dialed in as I'm doing this now at 174. And the way that he got a little upset at things against Nebraska and he wasn't taking any of it. Right. And there's maybe a little different edge to Levi. And, but Mitchell Messenbrink may be the most philosophical wrestler in the country. Good interview, just goes off on tangents a little bit, but he's I think they have quietly, you could argue, their best lineup, maybe their deepest one, especially when one guy gets hurt, like Braden Davis didn't wrestle last week, and you have a true freshman come in and he may be better than Braden Davis. So this isn't ending anytime soon.
Zach Sako had a great tweet. What would Penn State's number 2 lineup do to the rest of the country? Probably finish in the top 4.
Yes.
At final. But Messenbrink at 65, Levi Haynes at 74, Rocco Welsh at 84. Rocco Welsh, the name just doesn't strike me as a wrestler, so I laugh every time I see it. And Josh Barr at 197. That isn't exactly Combs, Koenig, Ruth, Gehrig, Musial, and Lazari, but it's pretty close. Am I right?
Well, yeah. And I think you have to look at just the numbers because they don't lose and they don't give up points. And I think, like you mentioned, Cole Marisolo, Rocco Welsh is getting better as the season goes on. He just looks more comfortable, maybe a little more confident, aggressive. So you forget maybe a little bit of how good that guy is because this is his first year at Penn State. And now Penn State fans have 2 Roccos to root for, right? Their starter at 184 and their starting quarterback coming up. When's the last time you had 1, no less 2 prime Roccos at Penn State?
I had no idea where you were going with that. I had no idea. I didn't even know. I'm like, where's the second? Oh, Rocco back. There we go. Transitioning it over to football. Speaking of football, remember when it was compete 365 and we have to be all in on game day, not only on game day, but the days leading up to it and in the offseason? Do you remember that?
I'm not sure. What are you talking about?
Well, I'm looking at the financial report for Penn State football the last year. Penn State football's game days expenses were $12,388,903. We'll say end change in that. Ohio State's game day expenses, $6.08 million. How much fireworks are going off at Beaver Stadium for $6 million more dollars? Somebody, and this is all part of the show and tell, the charades that everybody now from players have called out, saying now there's a football coach. There's not a production assistant back there now coaching the football team. $6 million more. Like, where are the results?
Right. Well, yeah. I always laughed at the fireworks during the daytime, right? Has there ever been a bigger waste of money than lighting off a firework at noon? But I think Penn State fans, I think they got tired of it all, and I think that was understandable because the only way you can't keep promising, in a sense. Yeah. Even though the promises are way big, you can't keep doing it and not delivering year after year. And it's like, there's no fireworks. There's no amount of fireworks or tailgates or anything else or blue band drum major flips that are going to ever make up for like Oregon State. I was thinking about that the other night. So they go Penn State fans in 2 weeks last year went from being upset that they didn't win the biggest game to then being upset the next week that they just couldn't even beat a bad team.
Yeah.
Like, that's a pretty big sway to kind of go in your mind, right? I mean,
Remember
that's right there.
I said Villanova should be a tougher game than UCLA before the season.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, that's just not that UCLA actually was a bad team on that day, but that's what their record showed. That's what the feel was. That's what it's going to be looked at as. And so, wow, we've just been through so much. And I think until the thing is, what are we getting for a blue-white game? I that's what Penn State fans, I think, want to know to some degree, right? If you're planning to come up for that weekend, what weekend even is it?
I think they go.
Do we know? I don't think we even know what weekend in April they're doing anything, do we?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I think they should go back to like the roots of it a little bit. Let's get just a normal scrimmage, make it a practice scrimmage, however you want, stoppages, make it like a full practice if it's not going to be a game. Basically make it an open practice that's hyper competitive. I wouldn't mind it. And literally to get the fan base back. Remember when they used to have the players line the field and the fans go on to meet it? Just do that. Get some goodwill going with your fans. This is an era where you're constantly asking for money, and you're going to be asking for more money. Pat Kraft talks about growing revenue. At some point, you just can't ask. You also have to give when you're the one always asking. And this is an easy one. Let these guys that are in the NIL market meet people face to face. Have kids come up and smile. I think it should. Those were great. I mean, I've always heard fans talk about them and what it was. I know security might be an issue. They should be able to handle it. I mean, heck, they spent $6 million more in Ohio State for game day during the regular season. So they should be able to handle blue-white game security coming up. But that's just me. I don't know what you think about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, last year, it was just kind of discombobulated where they were trying to have autographs, but you had to kind of wind away, try to find a line and wind your way through this crazy line under the stadium where the concession stands are and stuff. But years ago, what you're describing, it was a lot better for reporters too, because you could go inside the ropes on the field and the players would just be lining the field, and it was a lot easier, I think, for fans. But, hopefully we get a date and weather is cooperative, because I don't know what the renovation construction will do to this come April, but wonder if how much of an issue that may be, though. That hasn't been really brought up, but they're behind schedule. We can know they're behind schedule because of the winter for sure, if nothing else, the weather. So what mode are they in? I mean, that's the big thing here, right? $700 million. They can't get too far behind schedule. That's the thing, to keep your costs kind of somewhat on point. So
does that strike you that there's $700 million renovation and just the expenditure that I just pointed out about game day costs? Maybe the game day cost, that $6 million, is related. That's what it costs extra to secure the Beaver Stadium and to get people in and out during this renovation. It could be something as simple as that. But if it's not, I just view this as a waste of $6 million, which interest on that $6 million goes to more millions of dollars and just keeps snowballing when you're trying to finance and raise this much money for a massive renovation project. That is the future of the department.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the numbers, football generated a record amount of revenue. The athletic department generated a record amount of revenue. Now, they spent nearly all of it. They only cleared, but they were still, they're in the black. They're over $200,000, down from over $5 million that they cleared overall the year before. But Pat Kraft said he was going to spend money. I don't know if people have any problem with that. Because he's like, we got to spend money if we want to compete and win at the things that we want to. So I don't know. Overall, the NIL is a new line item budget. That gets equaled into things. Revenue sharing will be now part of it come this next fiscal year. So, and football still really is the is the only thing bringing in significant money. So,
Yeah. Penn State basketball turning a profit because of their TV contract. My argument is invest in basketball. That's actually one spot as a revenue generating sport that they could actually grow revenues. No administration at Penn State has ever tried to do that seriously. I think they're missing the boat on that. Frank, people were all up in arms over the NIL spending because they saw what football was. Then they saw what wrestling was getting, like just over $1 million. Then they saw $3 million for basketball and whatever it was for hockey. I'm drawing a blank on the number, but wrestling really doesn't need the NIL money. And, some of my former colleagues and I have talked about this is guys are going up there because they want post-college money. And the way to that is the Olympic Training Center and the guys are going to wrestle in the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club.
Right. And they get other types of funding, though, for wrestling, right? So they don't necessarily rely solely on NIL. That's a program that's kind of somewhat more self-sufficient because of Nittany Lion Wrestling Club and boosters, donations, that type of thing, more so than the others. And, I don't know, the expense of a wrestling team is way different than I would think than some of the sports. I mean, it is a smaller team, and they make one kind of cross country trip a year, maybe. I mean, it's not as much. I don't think it's as much traveling. It's the season's not as long, not as many events per se. I don't think so. I don't think they need to put as much money into wrestling to get it to be the best program in the world. I don't know what kind of, but yet wrestling isn't going to bring you in money either. I mean, like you said, it's basketball and football. I mean, you could pour all the money you want into ice hockey and be as great as you want, but that's not going to be a big revenue generating sport, no matter what you do. So
it's sense of pride sports. That's what it is. That's like Penn State takes a lot of pride in women's sports. That's why a lot of people are upset with the women's basketball team. Women's hockey, I don't think people realize, top 5 in the country. I've always expected the women's hockey team to win a national championship before the men's team. Some people told me I was crazy, but I've just always expected that to happen. And they started out bad, like really bad. Going off that cross country trip, I heard a story way back in the day when I was living in State College. And this is like right when everything was getting going. Penn State had women's basketball and wrestling in the same state or near each other. But one was supposed to bus home and there was weather coming. So there was communication to like hold the team playing for women. And somebody from the women's organization who's not there anymore, I want to make that clear, not there anymore, made the comment, make sure the wrestlers shower. And that really offended the wrestling team and Kale. And the message was sent, don't hold the plane for us. We'll find our own way home. And I just thought that was awesome. And that came from somebody in the wrestling program who's still in the wrestling program. Told me that as I was, working a baseball game. And it's just one of those stories that's always stuck with me. And again, the person who made the comment from women's basketball, no longer here in the program, but it just always stuck with me that you're going to say that to Cale Sanderson guy. It's just a petty comment. And when we look at the track of the women's basketball program, I point to that as one of the reasons that program started to slide downhill, and it was never rectified. Coach Krieger's got to get that turned around. So, but all right. I think it's a good time. Bring in our guest, documentary filmmaker, John Ziegler. John, welcome to the program.
Andrew, it is an honor to be here after quite a long wait. We've been talking about doing this for quite a while.
I'm a man of my word. I said we get you on in the offseason. It took a while. It's tough to get people together. We lost Mike Gross to an illness today, so we apologize for that. But we got 3 out of 4 here, so that's 75%. That's good enough. Kind of how did we get down this path? I kind of like reached out to you after the Nebraska game with Terry Smith wearing the button, and you and I kind of had a little friendly disagreement about some things.
Well, yeah. In fact, I think our conversation on text message is an interesting insight into this case, because after being on this Penn State, Joe Paterno, Jerry Sandusky story for basically the last 14, almost 15 years now, I have a bit of PTSD. I'll fully acknowledge that when it comes to the way people respond to me, especially people who are in the media or have a connection to the media. And, you and I don't know each other that well, but we know of each other. I'm certainly know of you. And I've been hoping and just really disappointed that this has not happened, that somebody within the Penn State football community would at least hear me out. I'm not asking for people to, agree with me unless they actually agree with me, but I just feel like I have not gotten a fair shake. And I feel as if there's there's some significant reasons, not necessarily good reasons, but significant reasons for that. And so I will acknowledge that I interpreted some of your responses to me in a way that was more negative than they deserved because of my 14 years of experience of being, I think, badly mistreated, especially within the Penn State community.
I got you. Well, Frank will tell you, I'm a stand-up guy. I'm Mr. Positivity all the time in the booth.
Oh yeah, and his family tailgates top notch at Beaver Stadium. So
thank you, Frank.
If you get back east, John,
I appreciate that. So, John, let me go in to ask you about this. And you were very big on Terry Smith becoming the head coach at Penn State, and if I'm not mistaken, a lot of it was related to this. I don't want to say the last hurrah for Joe Paterno to be recognized and some wrongs to be righted. I think everybody who listens to this podcast would know I'm a Joe Paterno supporter. I don't necessarily think it was one way or not, but why did you feel the way you did regarding Terry Smith and Joe Paterno? That's
a really good and fair question. I mean, look, I will fully acknowledge, I've been very public about this. Well, before the so-called scandal, I had a lot of admiration for Penn State. I despise the way Penn State as an institution and as a football program handled this entire situation. And so I actually root against Penn State with great passion most of the time. I have very few rooting interests left in sports, and one of them is to root against Penn State football. I'll fully acknowledge that because of what I know to be just an absolute abdication of all concept of due process and fairness and embracing a completely false narrative and destroying innocent people's lives. So I think I have very good reason for that. However, as someone who understands the reality of college football, the reality of politics, and the reality of this story, I'm very much aware that the chances of Joe Paterno ever being remotely made whole are dwindling on a daily basis. It's just basic demographics. I mean, every day a Joe Paterno fan or more dies, and every day someone within the Penn State community turns 18 who has never even heard of Joe Paterno or has no knowledge really of Joe Paterno. And so from a demographic standpoint, that's an inevitable loss. And it gets worse every day. I mean, Franco Harris, who was a very good friend of mine because of this case before he died, he and I would talk about this all the time. Now, Franco, of course, was way more optimistic about things than I am. I would be very optimistic, too, if I caught the Immaculate Reception and won 4 Super Bowls. But the reality of Terry Smith was I saw a unique situation, a guy who played for Joe Paterno, a guy who clearly had admiration for Joe Paterno, had the guts to wear a 409 pin on national television in a game against a team being coached by another Joe Paterno guy. And unfortunately, Todd Blackledge, in my opinion, who I've had a lot of interaction with, some of it was very positive and then it turned very negative, was a total coward in not even referencing that Terry Smith was doing that. To me, the only way, the only path that I could see to a situation where Joe Paterno could ever be made whole is for a Joe Paterno guy to be the head coach and who knew the truth of the story. And it's my understanding, I've never spoken to Terry Smith, but it's my understanding Terry Smith understands what really did and did not happen here, and who happens to be black. And let's be clear, politically, that helps a lot because that gives him a lot of political correctness protection. He can take on causes that a white guy could never possibly get away with. There was at least a path there that if Terry had gotten the head job and was successful, he could then create a situation where we revisit the Joe Paterno situation and maybe some justice would finally be done for Joe Paterno.
Yeah. John, that 409 button was in some ways, if you went to a Penn State football game, that might have been the biggest sign that you would have seen that entire night that Joe Paterno had ever coached at Penn State. I don't know if you're familiar. I mean, because there's not
Right.
Andrew, I mean, what am I missing here? There's not much at Beaver Stadium that would ever remind you that the man coached there. 15 years later, what's your thought on just that? I mean, is that surprising to you at all?
No, because because I understand the bizarre, perverse, upside down self-interest that this so-called scandal created. It's the number one thing that people need to understand to fully comprehend the Penn State's Joe Paterno, Jerry Sandusky story. Everyone misunderstands the self-interest and the incentive structures. The key moment in this whole situation is in November of 2011, after Jerry Sandusky's arrest, when Penn State's administration and the Board of Trustees, urged on by Governor Tom Corbett, completely panics. They panic and they fire Joe Paterno in a complete rush to judgment for no actual reason. And it gets perceived, understandably so, as Penn State pleading guilty on behalf of not just Joe Paterno and Graham Spanier, who they also effectively fired, but also Jerry Sandusky. And in the public's mind and the media's mind, it sets off a domino effect where now, because people think there's a guilty plea that has been issued by Penn State. Well, Penn State would never do this unless it was real. They would be incentivized to defend their own people. To someone who doesn't understand the story, I get that perception. But if you truly understand the inner workings of what was happening, it's exactly the opposite. Because from that moment on, the leadership at Penn State is deeply, deeply invested in the idea that firing Joe Paterno was not wrong, that it was not a rush to judgment, that it was not done in a moral panic. Because if they fired Joe Paterno for no reason, and obviously, and is my belief, my very strong belief, that Jerry Sandusky is actually completely and totally innocent, and it's not even close. If that really did happen, then the people at Penn State who facilitated that are ignoramuses of the highest order, whose name will go down in infamy forever for having destroyed this man's life, his legacy, caused his death, caused massive destruction to the reputation of the university, of the football program. They almost got the death penalty. And so Penn State at that moment becomes incentivized to wipe Joe Paterno off the face of the earth, literally getting rid of the statue and making sure that no mention. I mean, my gosh, they can't even celebrate anniversaries of national championship games properly anymore. Because
John, let me dive into there a little bit. You've had Bob Costas on. A lot of people would consider Bob Costas the gold standard of sports journalism. You've talked to him years ago, and he has defended Joe Paterno. And it seems like as the time has gone on, but the Paterno name, it's become more favorable in this whole thing. You've just had Bob Costas on recently talking about the death of journalism. That's a whole other topic, and I know you guys didn't dive into the Sandusky case a lot. So as Joe Paterno has become more favorable, it seems in some public perception, it doesn't seem, however, like the public has been agreeable to the bigger claim regarding Jerry Sandusky and maybe a new trial, even as there's been some, I don't want to say prosecutorial misconduct as licenses being suspended. We know that's happened a couple times in Pennsylvania. Why do you think that with these small tidbits of information that have come out over the years, why hasn't that second claim translated into maybe more information or more of a second look at Sandusky?
Wow. Okay, I could talk for 3 hours.
I know that's a loaded question.
No, but let me. I'm going to try to break down what you asked because there's some important stuff there. Let me first address Bob Costas because I think this is both interesting and important. I've interviewed Bob Costas many times, like at least 3 or 4 times, and we've always discussed in some way, shape, or form the Penn State Joe Paterno Sandusky case because that's our connection. I mean, he and I started communicating 12 years ago when I interviewed Jerry Sandusky in prison and went on the Today Show, because obviously he and I share a pretty unique position. We're the last two people at the time, the last two people that have done interviews with Jerry Sandusky on the record. And his was obviously integral to the perception that Jerry Sandusky was guilty, because Jerry Sandusky was ill-prepared for that, gave a terrible interview, an interview that was so bad, even I, who presumed Sandusky was guilty at the time, thought to myself, wait a minute. That was so bad. How in the world did this guy possibly get away with this for 40 years? It honestly was one of those situations where I started to turn in the other direction, because there's just no way. And I am the only person on the planet who has spoken to Jerry Sandusky, Joe Amendola, Sandusky's attorney, and Bob Costas, the three integral people in that interview, about that interview. I'm the only one. And it has been my goal with Bob Costas to do a couple of things. To educate him about the real case in a way, and I'm a realist. I am more realistic than anybody I know, especially on this case. Bob Costas is never going to come out unless Jerry Sandusky is freed from prison and say that Jerry Sandusky is innocent. There's nothing in it for him whatsoever. Frankly, there's nothing in it for him to even communicate with me, except the fact that I think he has honest journalistic curiosity about the truth of the matter, and he respects my research and investigation on this. But my goal has been, and I think I've actually been successful. This is one of the few things I've been successful at in this whole nightmare, this fiasco. My goal with Bob Costas has been, if I can convince him to have real significant doubts about Sandusky's guilt, it frees him up to defend Joe Paterno, which is his natural inclination, without the fear that he's actually somehow defending a pedophile protector. And let's be clear, Costas has moved on this story significantly. When the Free Report came out, that was one of the many, many elements of the perfect storm here, because the 2012 Olympics were about to take place. And Costas was in Europe. He hadn't read the report. He goes on NBC. He just presumes that everything is true and real, and he throws Paterno under the bus at that point. He is, to his credit, acknowledged that was a mistake and reversed himself. So that's the Costas situation. And by the way, my last episode of the Death of Journalism podcast with Bob Costas, he more strongly defended Joe Paterno than I've ever heard him before. Now, as far as the Sandusky thing, Costas is actually a pretty good indication of why it is that it's impossible for the public and the media to accept the reality that there's no evidence indicating Jerry Sandusky did anything criminal. It's the ultimate catch-22. No one is going to feel safe other than me, because I'm, stupid and actually care about the truth. Nobody other than someone like me is going to come out and publicly get themselves destroyed making this case until Jerry Sandusky is exonerated by a court of law. But a court of law is never going to do that in Pennsylvania, where all the judges are elected and where the entire state apparatus is deeply invested in this mythology of his guilt, unless the public and media sentiment changes. So it's the ultimate catch-22. It can't happen. That's why it has not occurred, even though Andrew, with all due respect.
Well, I wanted to ask you, what is the status of the appeal, of getting an appeal? Because I think one thing, and I think you make very good points on, and I think a lot of people in journalism would back this up, the speed of that trial in modern day America is unheard of.
Yeah,
it's unheard of. I mean, we're looking through, and now, that was done in the shadow of the Catholic Church events. Now we're in the Epstein events, and we're thinking about how long this is taking to play out. And yet you go back to 2011, 2012, and that thing was completed in a football offseason. Now, with law licenses being suspended, the ability to not be able to practice defense attorney anymore for some people, new witness statements and things like that. What is the status of this possibly happening?
All right. Well, again, Andrew, you have raised some really significant points. The speed at which this transpired is unprecedented. From arrest to conviction in like 6 or 7 months. By the way, in the middle of a moral panic, Joe Paterno dies in the middle of this. So Jerry Sandusky and the community in which he is being tried is not just a pedophile. He's the pedophile that killed Santa Claus. I mean, the not one continuance in this case. I am an ardent anti-conspiracy person. Okay. It is a huge part of my entire worldview and persona. But if there is a conspiracy in this case, let me tell you what the conspiracy was. The conspiracy was an alliance between the court system of Pennsylvania, Penn State University, the prosecution, and the NCAA to get this thing done before next football season. That was the goal here. And that's why there was this rush, because there was this massive question as to whether or not Penn State was even going to be able to play football next year. And when you just look at the dates, it's absolutely ridiculous that this thing got done. The trial was over by May. Louis Freeh was set up perfectly to do his press conference on the day after the baseball all-star game, which everybody knows is the slowest sports news day of the year. And then in record speed, you want to talk about record speed, the NCAA, how many years did they take on the Reggie Bush investigation? Within just a couple of weeks, they hand down their almost death penalty. Penn State capitulates by taking down the Paterno statue, and everything is wrapped up nice and clean just in time for football season to start. That doesn't happen by coincidence, all right? Now, as far as the state of the appeal, one of the many things that people who are opposed to my position cannot explain to me is how it is that Jerry Sandusky has been appealing every opportunity he can possibly get since his conviction and is still doing so today. That is not the way that serial pedophile cases work. None of this is consistent with the way that serial pedophile cases work. The way these things work 99.9% of the time, and that 0.1% is Sandusky, is there's an allegation that's contemporary. There's an investigation. They get a warrant for the person's laptop, their computers, their phones, whatever. They find pornography proving the allegation or some sort of sex crime. They then force, because these are messy cases and often difficult to prove, they force the person into a plea bargain. Then they serve a fairly light sentence the first time around. And then, by the way, they never appeal. They never, ever appeal. And most of the time, if they're guilty, when they go to prison, they get the shit beat out of them if they don't get killed. None of that has happened in Jerry Sandusky's case. He never plea bargained. He never confessed. He has appealed constantly every single opportunity he has gotten. His current appeal in a rational world would be a bombshell. It includes one accuser at trial and one major prosecution witness, the mother of another accuser who was the prosecution's last witness in their case, both recanting their testimony, along with the allegation, which has been acknowledged by the prosecution, that the two prosecutors in the case, Frank Fina and Joe McGettigan, are actually profiting, or were profiting. Joe McGettigan just died at the end of last year. Were profiting from the $20 million trust fund of accuser number 9, Sebastian Payton, who got twice as much money as any other accuser in the entire case, even though he didn't come forward until after Jerry Sandusky's arrest and Joe Paterno's firing. That alone, and this is the tippy tip of the iceberg, that alone in a rational world would get people going, what the hell is this all about? And by the way, in one of the great ironies, and there's been many that of the 14 years that I've been on this case, you know who understood this very, very clearly and very, very early on in this case, maybe a little bit more early than I did? According to the Epstein files, Jeffrey Epstein wrote an extremely detailed email. We ought to check it out in late 2012, explaining why he is convinced that Jerry Sandusky is likely innocent. And it dealt with a lot of the issues that you raise, Andrew.
I think that would come on. I'm kind of taking over this interview. Frank, my apologies. Do you want to
jump in? That's all right. I'm fastened.
Okay. So, John, just go and kind of, let me get my thoughts here.
Let me.
Okay, hold on. Just let me get this. Even if there was the misconduct in the Sandusky's case, let's assume that to be true. And there's alleged facts on both sides that contradict one another. That always happens in trials. If Louis Freeh is a fraud, everybody knows that Jerry spent a lot Some people would say an absurd amount of time around the foundation and young boys. And at the very least, they would say that is, creepy. Some would call it disturbing. Now, there's people that work with foundations all the time. But where does one point to these allegations of, we'll say convictions from the victims, because it went to trial, and we'll just say it's a conviction.
Right.
Where do the people who are saying you're defending this person and it's insanity, and they're coming at you and saying you're the one that doesn't have the grasp on reality, when there's these victims' statements and all this evidence of this man being around boys? Do you kind of get where I'm coming from on that?
Well, I'm a little confused. I mean, you want me to address my critics for?
The critics that are coming at you saying you're off your rocker, you're crazy, right. Because you're defending this guy who spent so much time around boys, and then there's victim.
Right. Well, here's what I would say. A lot of things. First thing I would say is the fact that this case has an environment where someone is called a pedophile protector, and worse, as I am on a consistent basis and have been for 14 years, simply for stating the facts of the case and a detailed alternative theory and scenario about what happened, is a perfect indication of why an injustice occurred here. This injustice can only happen in an atmosphere where everyone is afraid to state the obvious. And that's what's happened. So that's my first reaction is, thank you for proving why this environment led to a massive, maybe unprecedented level injustice. Okay. Now, as far as what you said about hanging out with boys, first of all, it's important to point out the Second Mile, a lot of people make this mistake, was not a charity for boys. All right. There were boys and girls almost equally in the Second Mile charity. I think you inadvertently may have answered your own question, because you alluded to the Catholic Church scandal. And the Catholic Church scandal plays a massive, massive role in how this whole thing went down. Because when the story breaks in late November of 2011, the media and a large portion of the public, and I believe the prosecutors in Pennsylvania, they think, oh my gosh. Because remember, the Catholic Church scandal was huge in Pennsylvania, and it had just broken a couple of years before this. And I think people went, oh my gosh, we've seen this movie before. Oh my gosh, it fills in all the details for us. Paterno was the Pope, and the administrators were the Catholic bishops covering up for the pedophile priest, Jerry Sandusky, and the Penn State football fans were the Catholic parishioners looking the other way to protect their sacred institution of football. That all made sense to people, and especially to the media. But it's all balderdash. It set people up for buying into a mythology. And once they buy in, once they become invested in a mythology, in a dark fairy tale, it is exceedingly difficult to bring people back, especially once enormous damage is done. Once people's lives have been destroyed, then people are exceedingly hesitant to ever acknowledge that they were wrong in rushing to judgment. It is far, far easier to dupe somebody than to persuade them that they have been duped. And that's effectively been my challenge for the last 14 years. It took me a long time. It took me people. I need to make sure this is clear. I didn't fully understand that Jerry Sandusky was innocent until sometime in 2013. And that was after I interviewed him the first time in prison. It wasn't until the second time I interviewed him in prison. And then eventually Dottie Sandusky and I went on the Today Show with Matt Lauer that I was fully convinced. I did not want to believe this. Maybe this is one of the most important things that you and your listeners need to understand. I didn't want this in my life. When I first started to suspect that Jerry Sandusky was innocent, my reaction was, oh no, please no. Oh, please no. Please. Because I knew I was going to be in a unique situation where I had no choice but to destroy my entire life over this, because I was the only one in a position to tell. I'm still really the only one in a position to fully tell this story, because the story is so complex and I'm the one that cracked the code on it. And I feel a moral obligation to tell the truth, which is why I've wanted somebody within the Penn State community to at least hear me out.
Well, we hear you out. And on that, with recent events on the national level, the Attorney General of the United States just sat before Congress yesterday. That when big cases happen, sometimes things get a second look and it gets put through a different perspective. So where do you think it goes from here? And in this new era, you have your podcast, Death of Journalism, that you've talked to Costas about. The local media it's not going to be able to take on something this big. It's not. I mean, the national media came in. Frank, I think you would agree with that. The national media came in. A lot of stuff was swamped under from the local media, even at the time. So where does it go from here? And does the recent events in the United States help?
Well, I don't think
to what you're from your side of the argument. I'll say help your side of the argument.
Look, as far as I think you're alluding to Epstein, I want to make clear Epstein was guilty. All right. And that's why he killed himself in a federal prison. The cover-up massive conspiracy theory, I believe is totally bogus. And I believe that the evidence is now overwhelming that massive conspiracy did not happen. That being said, there are some similarities in the way that the false narrative has been blown totally out of proportion by the media and by the public. I already mentioned the weird, coincidence that Jeffrey Epstein, who no one said was a dumb guy, was able to figure out that Jerry Sandusky was very likely innocent. In a rational world, if people understood everything that's been going on in the Epstein case and how many lies have been told, it might open people's minds to the Sandusky case, but that's not what's going to happen because we live in a world that's completely upside down. I am exceedingly pessimistic that anything realistic can happen. Now, there are people who are far more, still to this day, more optimistic than me. Names that might within the Penn State community that might shock you that people think that big things are going to happen. I'm not a believer in that anymore because I don't think we live in that world. This is just one of those cases that's just never going to be fixed for reasons that I've already stated. I'm just here to tell people the truth because there are still people, including in the Penn State community, who actually want to know what Joe Paterno asked for on his deathbed, which was find out the truth. I took that seriously. No Penn Stater did. I did. And I found out the truth that Joe Paterno asked for on his deathbed. And the truth is none of this actually happened. This was a clusterfuck of epic proportions, a perfect storm of BS that spun out of control. And let me ask you guys, I'm serious, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but Andrew and Frank, tell me why you believe Jerry Sandusky is likely guilty, assuming that you do. Why do you believe it? Tell me. I really want to understand this.
Frank, do you want to go first? Or?
Well, I wouldn't say that I would believe that because I don't think I'm in the position. I have a lot of doubt. I've always had a lot of doubt about especially Joe Paterno's involvement in this. And the more reading you do, what would make a lot of officials in this case want to blame Penn State football and put it all on Penn State football? So I've always been doubtful of this, but as far as what I would say that would make me believe that for sure he's guilty, I mean, I think it's, I think it's hard to blow back against the public perception. It's hard to blow back against the public perception that people believe he spent not just a lot of time around young boys, but time around them that does not jive with what a lot of people's thoughts are. Right.
So we're living your evidence.
Right. I know exactly.
Your evidence is we should be living in a world where we should be suspicious of any adult male who devotes their lives to at-risk children, boys and girls, and who as a top-notch defensive coordinator, famous defensive coordinator with a lot of sports street cred, has teenage boys gravitate to him who are athletes or want to be athletes, and he mentors them. That somehow is an indication that he's a pedophile.
No, I don't.
Without any evidence.
I don't think that's any. I don't think that's at all what's being said. I think and for me, it becomes I am a very big rule of law person. So why I have my druthers about the speed of the case. That is a major red flag to me.
Mm-hmm.
It is a major red flag to me, where at least there were failures within defense team to judicial scheduling. That was too big of a case to go through in 6-7 months. So that is a big red flag for me. At the same time, I believe in the rule of law and the Constitution of the United States. So that leads me to believe this. At the same time, we live in an era where the trust in our institution is constantly eroding. I mean, we see that every single day we turn on the TV with general public statements. And I think what Frank is saying, and what I would say, it gets hard to constantly try to poke holes and talk to people and get shouted down. That is one thing that I don't think, whether people agree with you or disagree with you, John, you have stood up against people that have shouted you down. And from a journalism perspective, I think that's why Bob Costas talks to you. Shout out Bob Costas, Syracuse alum, not actually a graduate. I am a Syracuse graduate, so welcome to the big time, John. But that gets difficult. Would you not say? I have had bosses when I've worked in my job literally dance in front of me and say, Joe knew. I've had a reporter that was on a case in York related to Priest and somebody in the district attorney's office that did not follow up on this and then was working for the attorney general's office and then came back to run a campaign, and the reporter was pulled off and said, stop knocking on doors. So I get it just gets hard to constantly go up against stuff.
Trust me, I know this, but I know this more than anybody on the planet. Before I want to do a little exercise here, which I think you guys are going to find interesting. But Frank, I want to real quick address something you said about you never bought the Joe Paterno aspect. You have questions about the Jerry Sandusky story. By the way, I think your position is very popular today among what I would call the educated Penn State class. I think there are a lot of people in your camp, right? But you just don't feel confident enough to say that Jerry Sandusky is innocent. What I would ask people like you to think about is the absolute absurdity of the idea that Jerry Sandusky could be anything close to what he is portrayed as, and for Joe Paterno to not have understanding of that, to not have been involved in this so-called cover-up. To me, if you use your logic and you understand Joe, you understand the nature of college football, you understand the facts of this case, it's really an all or nothing situation. And in my opinion, it's nothing. Joe didn't know because there was nothing to know. That's the Occam's razor, most logical scenario. Now, I want to play a little game here. Andrew and Frank, I want you guys to go back to November of 2011. And I want you to pretend that I have come back from the future, right? I'm Michael J. Fox. And you guys are in the middle of this moral panic in State College. The sky is falling. And everyone is presuming that Jerry is guilty. And when Joe gets fired and Grant Spanier gets fired, everyone thinks, oh, my God, this whole thing is real. What if I came to you like Michael J. Fox and I said, Andrew and Frank, here is what the reality is going to be in 2026. And these are all absolute facts. Jerry Sandusky will have never plea bargained in this case, will have never confessed in this case, will have never stopped appealing in this case. His wife, Dottie Sandusky, will have never moved from State College, even though her life is far more difficult in State College than if she moves somewhere else. And she's still 100% supporting him. By the way, speaking of supporting their husbands, Graham Spanier's wife would never divorce him. Gary Schultz's wife would never divorce him. Tim Curley's wife would never divorce him. Sue Paterno would never stop defending Joe Paterno. On the other side of the equation, Mike McQueary would be divorced. Aaron Fisher, victim number one in this case, whose name you didn't even know at this time, he would be divorced by his wife. His mom, who was key to his allegation, would be divorced in this case. Sarah Ganem, the reporter that was being praised as this journalistic savant, she'll win the Pulitzer Prize and she'll never write a book, which is impossible, unheard of for a Pulitzer Prize winner in a story of this magnitude. She'll go to CNN and do absolutely nothing and not have her contract renewed. And then she will not even be in the business in 2026. This journalistic savant on whom we were putting all of the weight of this story and the media was using as their primary source. Meanwhile, the grand jury judge in this case would lose his position for misconduct in the Sandusky case. The prosecutor, Frank Fina, would lose his law license for a year suspension because of misconduct in this case. That we would have not one but two key prosecution witnesses recant their testimony in sworn affidavits, including one of the primary accusers at trial, victim number 10, Ryan Rittmeyer, that we would have under audio, in an audio interview, we would have Ira Lupert, the man who gave away well over $100 million of Penn State's money, acknowledging on audio tape that he knew that a lot of the people he gave money to were riding the gravy train, that's a quote, and were not actual victims. I mean, the number of things, I could go on and on here. If I told you all that, all of which I just said is 100% factually accurate, would you, and I'll add in that we've now proven that the date of the McQueary episode, by the way, this is really important, that the date of the McQueary episode in November of 2011 would be acknowledged by the prosecution as being totally, completely wrong. The wrong date, the wrong month, the wrong year. And that I believe we have proven that even the second date the prosecution chose was completely wrong in a way that totally changes the timeline and the context of McQueary's story. If I told you guys all those things, what would your reaction in November of 2011 have been?
Well, I had a lot of doubts in 2011 about the totality of the case. I would still have doubts, but I just don't know what I would think specifically about Jerry because of not being in the position to legally to really understand whether he did. It's a fine line between to me.
Andrew, if I had come back to you and told you all those things,
it's a fine line, but just to throw out one in there, something that's always popped out to me on the grand jury report is the way the grand jury report was written on one of the pages that said a student saw. I don't consider a 28-year-old graduate student as a student, and a lot of people in the media nationally took that as a normal 18 to 22-year-old student. At 28 years old, 27-year-old, you're a man. So that's always given me pause. And with that, what you've said, I agree with the whole totality subject matter, and I agree. We live in a country where second looks are always taken. I have thought second looks should be taken.
Right. I agree.
In this thing, we understand that we live in an imperfect world, and part of your journalistic work, which you've talked about with Costas on multiple levels, there's no such thing as bad journalistic work that uncovers episodes. I think knowing those facts today, back in 2011, I don't think it goes through in 7 months. There's a lot more discussion. There's a lot more pausing. There's a lot more digging on all sides.
All right. Well, and by the way, I just put out a list there that I don't have fully memorized. Let me just throw a couple more at you. That Gary Schultz.
We do have to wrap up.
Hold on a second. Let me just say, hold on a second. Gary Schultz has come out and said he believes Jerry Sandusky is innocent. Franco Harris came out with a podcast where he talks about confronting Mike McQueary at Joe Paterno's funeral and coming away totally convinced that Mike McQueary did not witness any sort of a sexual assault. The evidence is overwhelming. Our podcast is called With the Benefit of Hindsight. It's free. It's epic. And if you care about this case, you've got to listen to it.
John, thank you very much for coming on. Thank you for answering questions. Insightful. And the one thing that we do, and Mike, Frank, myself, is we talk about things that other people probably don't want to talk about. So I hope in The Death of Journalism podcast, if we get a shout out that we are willing to listen, willing to give you a platform, I hope you think we did you a fair shake by coming on here.
I wish you would have asked me some more questions. I'm happy to come back anytime and answer any question anybody has, whether it's you or a listener, because there's not one question I've ever been asked in this case that I cannot provide a very coherent answer to. And because I'm positive I'm right. It's not even close. That's the most amazing thing.
This isn't a one and done thing. There was no, when we were talking, it wasn't a one and done thing. We try to keep them under an hour. I do have a family appointment to get to. John, you're aware of what I have to do. Doctors can't wait sometimes when you got to schedule things in and out. So John Ziegler, really appreciate it. John, give your the Death of Journalism podcast and the one with Costas a shout out here, because that's it. That is intriguing. He is the gold standard in sports journalism for a large portion of this country.
Well, every week, I once a week, I do a podcast called The Death of Journalism. But for this case, we've done a 22 episode podcast that's really quite epic with a co-host by the name of Liz Habib, a Pitt grad, who I convinced I was right about on all this. She and I worked together many, many years ago in television. That podcast is called With the Benefit of Hindsight. And I urge anyone who cares about the Penn State quote unquote scandal to listen to it. Be careful. Once you start, you're going to be addicted.
Thank you, John. And I wish you good luck with your golf game out in Southern California.
All right. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thanks, John. John Ziegler joining the program. A lot of people would say you're nuts for having him on. He's a firebrand and things like that. The whole time in this case, it's part of it is he does raise good, valid points. And there's other points to be raised counter against him. And I think one of the things that we don't know from the outside is we don't get to see as much as the evidence that he's been able to see with the people. And the same thing from the other side, the legal aspect, we don't get to see all the intricate details from a prosecution side as well. But John does raise a lot of valid points.
Absolutely. No, and I've been, I'm not saying I'm going to agree with every single thing that he or anyone else has come out in support of this, but I've been intrigued by him from the beginning. And his devotion to working this case, so to speak, for 14 years or 15 years, so, I mean, yeah, it's a lot of great points. And I don't think to a lot of people it gets old. I think, though, we brought up about how Joe Paterno doesn't get really any mention in Beaver Stadium on football weekends anymore, but I don't know if it gets old to me. I still think it's intriguing to me because of going through it for sure 15 years ago, but it doesn't go away.
I know people, I'm very close friends, very, very close friends with people who are close friends with two of Jerry's victims. They despise me at some point as in a friendship that they cannot believe that I still cover Penn State, that I go to Penn State games. That's how convinced they are on the other side. I say that as just a perception of how people in this country and some people in Pennsylvania view this case. But there are aspects that are eyebrow raising. And that is the one thing in this country. There are second looks.
Absolutely, Andrew. And I'll say this. I don't think, like a lot of cases, and we dealt with one in York with Lily Bell Allen and the race riots in 1969. And a lot of the truth in that case did not come out until people were literally on their deathbeds writing confessions and audio tapes, because they weren't going to die, so to speak, if they could help it, without people knowing what was in their minds and their hearts. And I still think that there's a lot of unanswered questions. How about if we say that? There's a lot of unanswered questions in how this was handled. And I could go without even bringing up even specifically Jerry in this, just how Penn State handled all this and all the players involved, from the second mile to government officials, because of the fact that everything is so intertwined. We'll leave it at that, right? Everything in this between second mile, Penn State, and the government, so intertwined with the players involved, with everyone's own, what is best for me, my interest. How is this not complicated, right? And I don't think we have the answers, a lot of them yet.
In the Twitter world, this was the first big Twitter story in the country, and it moved like wildfire. And that, I think, played a whole part in it. And I make no judgment one way or the other because I'm not qualified to make the judgment.
Right. That's what I was trying to tell John. That's what I was
informed. I'm not as well as informed as I should be. And him and Bob Costas and defendants or defending lawyers and prosecutors are probably the only people that are as informed. So, folks, you probably thought you were tuning in for a pure sports podcast here. We don't do politics on this show. We don't do politics. I guess I kind of mentioned it with the Epstein files coming in here, but it was case in point. But this was a different path, and we are open to talk about a lot of things on this podcast. Let us know. Send us an email, BlueWhiteTailgatePodcast@gmail.com. Hit up Frank. Hit up Mike on Mike's Substack, Gross Rational Product. Frank at the York Daily Record. And just let us know what you thought of this. We want to bring in people's perspective, and I'm sure there's people that are going to hate that we did this podcast. They're going to hate it, and there's going to be some people that really appreciated it and loved it. That's the world we live in. We want to talk, so we thank John Ziegler for coming on the podcast. Frank, any closing words?
No, I think I'm good. I can't wait till tomorrow night, Friday night in the Bryce Jordan Center, and maybe we'll talk some more wrestling coming up in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, we're going to get Jeff Byers on. We're going to get Brian.
Yeah, I was setting you up.
There we go. We'll do a whole wrestling podcast just with Jeff Byers. So he's one of our buddies and a good friend. So thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Frank, have a good one. And Mike Gross will be back as soon as he feels better. So get well, Mike. Thanks. Bye.